Okay, Tov, today's daf is daf Mem Zion and Bab Mציעא. We learn for Achenical basis on Rav Shapiro. We're about halfway down the page, even with the beginning of Agos Sabach. On the right side, you see the Agos Sabach on the right. That's where we left off yesterday. But Makonim, when it comes to a kinyan chalipin, an exchange, a barter, whose kli do we use? Now we know. We can take the example now. We're selling chametz via the rabbi. Let's call it. He gives us his pen or his handkerchief or his cloth. He's acquiring the rights to our chametz, right? So he's buying it. So he gives us his kli, his item, and we give him back the chametz. Of course, afterwards we give him back the kli anyway, but that's just so he can do it with the next guy, right? But he's giving us his kli. So the one who's acquiring, he's acquiring the chametz, use his kli. So it's an exchange. He gives us something, we give him back something. So that's the question of Makon, who's to use. Rav Amar b'Kaleb Shokona. That's how we paskin. The person who's acquiring it, he gives his kli to the person who's giving it to him. And so it's an exchange. It's a real barter. I give you my item, you give me back. The nechel lakona, why is that? Again, I've mentioned this many times that the kinyan works when you give something because it has to be my ratzon. You can't force me to give something away. You can't just say, I picked up your wallet, so it belongs to me. No, it has to be that I gave it to you, or I wanted to give it to you, I wanted to sell it to you. It has to be my ratzon. So what's the point of the caleb of the kona? If the person who's getting it, what does he have to use his kli for? The answer is the nechali lakona. The kona is happy to lahavi makna kona, that the makna, the one who's giving it to him, selling it to him, giving it to him, who's giving it over from his rishus to your rishus, that he acquires something. In other words, I'm happy to give you something, so you should give me something in return. That's the idea. The rabbi gives you the handkerchief or the pen or the book or whatever, and in return, you give him something. He's happy to give you something. And the whole point over here is that we want to give our chametz to the rabbi, or the rights to sell it to the chametz, right? We want to give that to him. So we're giving it to him. So what's the point of him giving us something? That's how the exchange works.
Lifting it.
He's giving it. Gives it to you. Yeah, you have to take it from him. You can lift it. You can be cone it with hagba. You pick it up, so you just take it. That's also lifting it up off it was on the ground. You just take it from his hand. That's also lifting it. In other words, he's happy to give you something so that you will give him something in return. So that's why we use the kalim of the kona, the one who's acquiring it. You give his kli to the makna, and the makna gives him in return whatever he's giving to him. But Levi says, no, the one who's giving it to you, he has to give you his kli. Meaning, if we would do it that way with the rabbi, we would give a handkerchief or a pen or a book or whatever to the rabbi, and also via that, we're giving him our chametz, or the rights to sell our chametz. So that's how Levi learned. Like, why is that? Like we're going to explain in a minute what the reason. Amalei Rafuna be discarded Rava. So Rafuna from that place at Rava. I don't understand. Levi to Amar b'Kalev Shamakna, that it goes with the kalim of the makna. In other words, it's not really a bar. It's not an exchange. The person who's giving you something gives you a handkerchief, and he's also giving you his chametz or his items with that. Is that how it works? Hakakani ara agav galima. It comes out that you can acquire the land via a shirt or a garment. Right? If that's the case, it comes out that real estate, the chasam that has an obligation with it, can be nikna with kesa, with nechasim, with movables. We learned the other way around in kedushin. Like Mike, when we mentioned this the other day, if I want to sell you my car and my house, I can give you my house, my land, my property. You can make a kinyan on that, and with that, you can be kona the car or the glove or whatever it is with that. But that's how that way you have to be kona the karka, and with the karka you can acquire the movable items via the karka, but not the other way around. Now you're saying that via the handkerchief or via the movable, he can acquire even the land. So this is what Rafuna from the Skarta said to Rava. So Rava answered him in a strong way, like the rabbis often do. We have a Levi Hocha. You're asking about Levi. According to Levi, who says that you use the kalim of the makna, the one who's giving the item, use his kli also, his handkerchief. And you're asking if that's the case, you can acquire land together with a handkerchief. Levi would be here Havimapik lapochi would send in front of you posted anora, a curse, right? The fiery round lashes, fiery whip of round lashes. That's called a curse, right? You posted anora. Why? Because you don't understand Levi at all. Misavas galima maknale. Do you think maknale? Do you think that by giving him the handkerchief, he also acquires the land via that? Doesn't mean that. By no, the makamakabel mine with the hana that the makna has, because you accepted my handkerchief or my pen or whatever. Gomer ba'aknile. That's why I give it to you, not because it goes together with the handkerchief. You get the land. No, I'm giving you the handkerchief. And in return for the pleasure that I get of you accepting my gift, I give you also my land. So it doesn't work together. Yeah.
Where's the Khalifin there?
Yeah, right. So it's not really Khalifin. It's not really Khalifin. It's an exchange. The exchange is that you're giving me pleasure. It's not Khalifin with physical items. In other words, I give you my handkerchief and I'm also giving you my chametz or my house, let's say, right? So where's the Khalifin? The answer is by you accepting my handkerchief or my book or my pen, whatever it is, with that pleasure that you give me by accepting my gift. Sometimes you give a pleasure. If you give an important man a pleasure, Gemara talks about in Kedushin. You remember a woman, when it comes from the Kaddish, you have to give her something, right? She doesn't give you the ring. There's no such thing as the double ring ceremony in halacha, right? It's you give her something, you give her a ring or money or value, and in return, she gives herself over to you. Not that it's a chalipa, we don't mean to say that, but it means you give him something. Now, what happens if a woman gives him something? So Gemara says that's not a kedusha. However, if it's an important person, if she's marrying a rabbi or somebody important, and she gives him a gift, she gets a big pleasure out of him accepting her gift. So then he's giving her something. That's the point. Here too, we're the same idea that according to Levi, that the chalipa does not work with an item being exchanged for an item, but rather the one who's giving the item is also giving the handkerchief. He's saying that in return for the pleasure, you're giving me pleasure by you accepting my handkerchief, I'm giving you whatever the item is, chametz or a house or whatever. Ketanoy, this shaila of whose kli you use in a chalipin is really machlokas tanam. First of the wide lines in the Gemara. Bezos of Yisrael the pasuk and Rus. Alagul ba'atzmura. On we'll see sales and exchanges. Lakaim called over to establish anything, meaning to make a proper transaction. Sholofish now, a man would take off his shoe, but not give it to the other guy. What does that mean? Geula, gula, gula zumachir means selling. It says by meiser behema, an animal of kachim, you can't sell it. It means you can't redeem it. So you geula here, redeeming is lashon of also selling it. You can't exchange it for money. Tumura zu chalipin. Tumura means an exchange. Also, you can't exchange it if you have an animal of kachim. You can't exchange it or exchange it for anything else. It's really a similar lashon. So it's like chalipin, right? Tumura is lashon of chalipin. The kaim called over. What does that mean? Shalafish nalo v'nas l'reyeyu. Me nasan me. Who gave it to whom? In that case, Boaz nasan l'goel. The Tanakama said that Boaz gave the goal. That would be like the first opinion, like Rav says, the Caleb of the Kona. Boaz acquired the rights to Rus, right? So he acquired that from the goel, from the next of kin in that family. So Boaz nasan l'goel, and in return, the goel gave him the rights. Rav Yehuda says no. Goel nasan l'Boaz. The goel gave a shoe or whatever to Boaz, and in return for his accepting the pleasure that he got out of Boaz accepting the gift, he also gave Boaz those rights. So that's the machlokas here to whose is it. L'maisa we paskin that it's the kalim of the kona, as we see when we sell our chametz, that the rabbi gives you his book or his pen or whatever it is, his handkerchief, and in return you give him your chametz. Tana, we learn this. Kona b'kli, you're kona with a kli. It's got to be a vessel of some sort. Kli doesn't mean a vessel only like a metal vessel or an earthenware vessel. It means, as we'll see, even garment or anything like that. Anything is considered a kli. Even though it's not worth anything, you can make such a kinyan. It's got to be a kli, just like we saw with Boaz, that it was a shoe. And the pasuk in Rus tells us that. How do they make a kinyan? A symbolic kinyan. Obviously, it's once you want to affect the transaction. I want to give you something. I want to sell you something. How do I show the symbolic transaction? That's the kinyan we're talking about. This kind of kinyan is a chalipin. There's another kinyan like Mashicha, Hagbah, Nasira, etc., or Chazaka. Okay. Rav Nachman, lo shanel b'kli. So here's the machlokas we mentioned yesterday between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes. Rav Nachman says it's got to be a kli. It's got to be a kli. Kli basically also means a garment of clothing, an inanimate object of some sort,
Something
right?
manufactured, that you've done something.
Yes,
right?
it doesn't have to necessarily be manufactured. It could also be non-manufactured. Let's say, I don't know, something that grew in the ground that wasn't
But you
manufactured.
has to be taken out of the ground.
Right.
And made into something
Right,
you
that's
use.
right. Yeah, or just whatever. Be a stick, a piece of wood also is a kli. A piece of a tree. Pardon? It doesn't have because an animate object would be considered paris. So he goes on to say, lo shanel b'kli, aval b'peri lo. Peri literally means fruit, but it also means produce. Rashi, the first of the wide lines at the bottom, tells us the same that Rashi told us the other day on the Muhammad base. Anything which is not a kli is a pri. Doesn't mean fruit literally. It means produce. It can be an animal. An animal is not a kli, right? It usually means a kli. Usually is something an inanimate object. At least it's inanimate at this point. So Nachman says that it's got to be like a shoe, just like a shoe is a kli. It's got to be a kli. Cannot use produce. Or Paris, even something which is not a kli. My time of Nachman says nalo shoe. Nalo it's got to be something like. Actually, doesn't mean only a shoe. It means something like a shoe. Could be a shoestring too. Anything which is not a pri. Anything which is anything like an inanimate object, a vessel. It could be clothing. Could be a hat. It could be almost anything, but not something that not like something that grows in the ground or an animal or something of that sort. So Rav Nachman says it's got to be only a kli, like a lot from now. My Talmud says, what's Rav Shesh's reasoning why he says you could even use produce? You could do it with an animal. Omer Kro l'kayim kol davar, anything to establish anything. Anything could be anything. So if Nachman yaksiv l'kayim davar, what does l'kayim davar? What does Rav Nachman do with that pasuk? Ahu l'kayim kol davar, and the nickname, anything could be acquired with a shoe, but the item that affects the transaction, the chalipin, that has to be something like a shoe, a kli. But it doesn't mean. But with the shoe, I can acquire payers, as we said before. Sometimes we said before that I learned yesterday, the day before, that you cannot make chalipin with a coin because your mind is on the value of the coin, which could be canceled by the government at any point. We said that, right? So to affect it, it's got to be a kli. According to Sheshes, it could even be a produce. It could be an animal for an animal, right? We said that according to Rav Sheshes, what's he going to do with the talk about case the hichlif shor para or chamor b'shor? How does that work if that's not a kli? According to Rav Sheshes, he had that problem yesterday, right? So we said speaking about where he also did something else. It wasn't just that, or he holds that it really was affected with money, but it's milslo shchich, etc. So he explained it away according to Rav Sheshes. But anyway, we pass like Rav Nachman that it has to be a kli. Rav Sheshes nam yaksiv nalo. What does Rav Sheshes do with the fact that it says nalo? It's got to be a shoe or something like a shoe. Rav Sheshes ma nalo davar mesuyim. It's got to be something, a complete item. A siyum is a finish or a complete item of kol davar mesuyim, something which is a complete entity. Because you can't use. Rav Sheshes says you could have a fruit or a produce of some sort, but it can't be a half. It's got to be a complete item. That's the idea. A shoe is a complete thing. The same thing over here. It's got to be a complete thing. So you could affect, according to Rav Sheshes, you can affect chalipin with a fruit of some sort, like a pomegranate or a nut, but it's got to be complete. Lapuka chasirim chasi. I goes to low. Rav Sheshes, braid Rav Vidi. Kaman kasvina idna. Today, when we write a document confirming the chalipin, right? Sometimes when there's a big deal involved, they make chalipin and they write a document confirming it. So we write in the document the mana that this transaction was done with a vessel, the kosher, which is kosher, which is valid, right? Lemiknebe, to acquire with it. What's the idea of there? Why do we put that in? But mana is lapukim of sheshes, with a vessel that comes to exclude from sheshes, namrakonim beperis. He says you could use even produce. Not so. You have to use a kli. The kosher, the Amar Shmuel says, Konan b'maruka, that you could even use a maruka. Rashi learns a maruka is a vessel, but it was made out of animal dung. Tosafos says that it's made out of date seeds, which are also used to treat parchment. But in any case, you can't use that. Shmuel says you could. So we say the kosher, these aren't, that item is not kosher. Lemikne, to acquire, lapuki middle Levi, to ksu from Levi, the Amar b'kelev shamakne, use the kelev of the makne, the one who's giving you the item. The one who's giving you the item. In other words, there's no physical exchange of items, but rather the one who's giving you the item also gives you the handkerchief. So we don't hold that way. It's because lemikne sounds like the one who's acquiring it. The one who's acquiring it, he's the one who gives the item, as opposed, right? Kamashman lemikne below leknuye. It means that the kamashman, right? Kamashman the mikne to acquire it, below leknuye, not to give it to somebody else. Bay, that fourth word, the kosher, the knuye bay. To exclude coins. Only with this, you can only use a valid vessel that belongs to the kona, the one who's acquiring it. Like in this case, the rabbi is acquiring your chametz, so he gives you that item. Rav Papa says to exclude a coin, you can't use a coin, as we learned that you cannot use a coin to affect the barter. Rav Zvid, Rashi says that the word bay amar lemute surina, to come to exclude something that you're not allowed to have any pleasure from, you can't use that either. You're getting pleasure, I guess, via the barter. Some say that bay amar papa, that the word bay comes to exclude lemute matbeya, that bay excludes matbeya, like our papa said before, and the word the kosher does not come to exclude the maroka, or the vessel made out of animal dung. He says that the kosher comes to exclude a sarna. Aval marika lo israf. You don't need to exclude that, because that's obvious that cannot be used. That you can't use animal dung or seeds or something of that sort. It's not even necessary to teach us that. Because that's obvious. That's not really an item of any, even though it doesn't have to be worth a shavaputa, but that's improper to use an item of that sort.
According to the daya, that says that it's the makne that gives the.
According to Levi, yeah. Mm-hmm.
How is it chalipin?
That's what I explained before to Moshe. It's chalipin because I'm getting pleasure. I'm giving you that. I'm getting you pleasure, and in return for the pleasure, I'm giving you my item. Asim konas matbeya. So we said in the Mishnah, a simon, a round blank coin. It's not minted. It's just a round blank. That can acquire the matbeya, because compared to the coins, that's produce or a kli. That's a product of some sort, right? It's an inanimate object. A simon konas matbeya, but the matbeya, which is a coin, does not acquire, because the coin, as we said, cannot affect barter. Mayasim, what is a simon? So it's used. It's a token. They use it as a token. They want to know when the bathhouse attendant needs to know how many people are coming, so he counts the tokens that they give him, and they took care of the payment either before or later on. But that's the token. So it's like a token. Meisvei. A machalin ma'aser sheni al simon. You cannot be machalo when you want to take ma'aser sheni food and turn it into money and take it up to your shalayim. You cannot redeem it on a simon, on a blank. It's got to be a coin. V'almos anitnas b'simon, and on money used as a simon base merchas, or on a token. So here he uses both items. He says you can't be machalo ma'aser sheni on an asimon, or on money used as or on a token. So you can't say asimon is a token, because he says both these things, on a simon or on a token. That means that asimon is not a token. Mashma that a simon is not money or a token given as a simon. Maybe you'll tell me that it means this: you cannot redeem ma'aser sheni money on an asimon, which is a token. Maybe that's what it means. Well, but we didn't learn that way, because the Bryce over there says different. It says machala ma'aser sheni al simon divri Rav Dosa. Rav Dosa says you could be machala ma'aser sheni on a blank, because it's still round. It looks like a coin. But for Shavan, they both agree. They both agree you can't use it on a token. So you can't say it's pushing from Farish, because the Tanakam Rav Dosa over here says that you may indeed redeem your ma'aser sheni food on an asimon, but you can't do it on a token. So it's clear that asimon is not a token. Elam Rabbi Yochanan, asimon pulsa. It simply means a round blank. It's like we had an amanal pulsa to know, round fiery lashes. This is pulsa, also means it's a round blank, like we call it blank. That's those who were in Israel many years ago know that we had these asimonium that you use for the phones. Why is it called a simon? Because it's a blank. It didn't have any image minted on it.
They weren't blank. Yeah. A blank is a slug.
It's like, yeah, because this had a hole in it.
That's not Simon. Simon
Had writing on it?
It
Yeah, but it wasn't a coin.
It was a token, not a.
It was a token, yeah. So there you go. I think it's talking a blank, but it's like a blank. It means blank that it wasn't minted as a coin. Plus Rabbi Yochanan Tamei, and Rabbi Yochanan, we always say, what's the you know, many times the if you called overseas, they went down real quick. You know, you put a whole bunch in, they went in, yeah. And when there was a long line at that particular phone, you knew that it was broken and it worked for free with no. Rabbi Yochanan went according to his reasoning, that Rabbi Yochanan says this, that it's a round blank. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Dosa, Rabbi Shmuel, they both said the same thing. Rabbi Dosa, we just said, Rabbi Dosa said you could be mechalel ma'aser sheni food on a simon. And Rabbi Shmuel, where's Rabbi Shmuel? It's the time of Tzarto HaKesef talks about that same idea. You will tie up the money, biyotcho l'rabos kol davar, so anything can be tied biyad. The Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says Tzarto HaKesef means to tie it up, right? The Tainish masot tzrura b'tzorachayim, let it be bound up. So it means anything can be bound up, which can be a blank too. So Rabbi Shmuel and both said that you could be mechal ma'aser sheni on a blank, on a simon. So here you see that Rabbi Yochanan goes according to his reasoning, because he said that Rabbi Dosa and Rabbi Shmuel said the same thing. And Rabbi Dosa just said you could be mechal on a blank, and Rabbi Shmuel said sarta kesef, anything can be tied up. So Rabbi Yochanan says it's a round blank that is going according to his reasoning. He said Rabbi Dosa and Shmuel said the same thing. Rabbi Kiva Rabbos called over sheish love surah. Sarta yidarshan as surah, as an image, something that has an image on it, not something which doesn't have an image. That's what the lashon of tzarta means. So it's got to be an image. It's got to be a coin. So we go back to the Indian of the basic idea of the Mishnah, that you could only make a kinyan with an item, not with a coin, right? So he said, the example was, we said that that besides the chalipin was, that Conan Zazet. But when we talk about how do you acquire something, we said meaning that you can't acquire it with money. You have to, a kinyan cannot be made with money, can only be made by pulling something, by making mashicha. Okay, so if you paid for it, but you didn't make mashicha, you can both go back on the deal. Rabbi Shimon said, no, only the seller can go back on the deal. He can give their money back. But the buyer, once he gave the money, even though he didn't make mashicha yet, cannot go back on the deal according to Rav Shimon. So we have to explain Rav Shimon. But the Tanakama says both of them go back on the deal. Now we go into this famous machlokas. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Dvar Torah Mos Konas. So we had we had the famous machlokas here about who's they're not as famous. Whose vessel do you use? You use the kona or the makna. So we say that's the kona. You go like Rav. That's one machlokas. How many machlokas? Does it have to be a kli, or could it even be produce, like an animal for an animal? The answer is we go like Rav Nachman, that it's got to be a kli. It can't be produce like Rav Shesha said. Now we have an even more famous machlokas. The kinyan that has to be mashicha, is that minatora? You have to make mashicha. Money doesn't work, or does money work? So we have an even more famous machlokas. Minatora, money acquires it, not just for karka. Karka for sure says minasna kesef v'kamlo. When it comes to karka, of course you can land nadlan. You could definitely buy that you can acquire it with the kesef shtar chazaka. Kesef is one of them. Comes from metalflin, no, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Does it work minatora, but the rabbi said it shouldn't work? Or does it only work, does minatora, money doesn't work? So Rabbi Yochanan says minatora does work. Mos konas. Why do we say you need mashicha and not money? Because you shouldn't tell them, oh, you paid for it yesterday. Oh, by the way, there was a fire here, burnt down. Too bad. So we don't want that to happen. So we said, you know what? It's not a kinyan until the purchaser pulls it to himself, makes a mashicha. What's the problem? The one who started the fire, he has to pay, right? That's nezek. You start a fire, you burn something down, you got to pay, right? The like about it. So it doesn't mean that he burnt it down. Doesn't mean that we're not talking about where there's an arsonist over here. We're talking about where fire broke out. We don't know what happened. Somebody left a cigarette there, whatever, and place burnt down. We're afraid of that. And the owner who sold the item yesterday, I sold that merchandise yesterday, I have my money, I don't care. It's your problem. We don't want that to happen. So therefore, say if you leave it in the rishus of the seller until the purchaser picks it up, he's going to make an effort. He's going to be moser nefesh. He's going to make a strong effort, and he's going to take the trouble and save the fruit, save the bushels or the grain, whatever it is. Be low, but if you don't make that gzeira, then lo moser nafshe. He's not going to save it. So therefore, minat Torah. If I bought a silo full of grain from you and I paid for it, it's mine. If it burns down now, it's my problem, even though I didn't pick it up yet. So the rabbi said, no, it's not mine until I pick it up. Therefore, if I paid for it, it's not really mine yet. It still belongs to the seller till I pick it up. He owes me the grain because I paid for it, right? But it's really his, so that if it burns down, if there's a fire there, he'll make an effort to save it. Rish Lakish disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan. He says, no, Mashiachim precious Minat Torah. Minat Torah, the kinyan is Mashiachim. Metalton are not nicknamed with money doesn't help. Mashiachim precious Minat Torah. My time at Rish Lakish, where's this pasuk? I'm going to pasuk says the chisimkru pasuk when it comes to onah, to fraud, that you can't cheat somebody. It says chisimkru if you sell something to your friend, right, to your associate, okana miyad amisecha, or acquired from his hand. How do you acquire metalton? By hand. You got to pick it up. Not enough just to pay for it. Rabbi Yochanan Amar miyad lemute karka. That means to exclude karka. Why? What do you mean exclude karka from what? Not that not that we're talking about. We're not talking about that has to be karka. Right? To exclude from karka, the less be no. The pasuk there says al tonu isha. So don't commit fraud on your associate, on your neighbor. Right? Miyad with the calculus, but no, it's tell you, miyad bisecha, miyad is the karka. If it's something that there's when it comes to metalton, there is fraud. Miyad, something that you bought by hand, something that's passed over by hand, don't commit a fraud there. But on karka, there's no fraud. Meaning, if I bought a piece of land for $1 and I sell it for $20 million, that's not illegal, right? Karka, there's no value, there's no price on land.
You're limited to your profit.
Pardon?
You're limited to the amount of profit that you can have.
Not on karka. Not on karka. There was a takana on necessities, on basics, that you shouldn't earn more. You shouldn't earn more than a third profit. I'm not talking about fraud in general. Fraud in general on a car, let's say, sell you my car. It's got to be manufacturer suggested retail, not a sixth more or a sixth less. Right? When it comes to vegetables and fruits that the rabbis made at the corner, don't make a profit of more than a thing because they didn't want to have price gouging and limit the necessities. When it comes to karka, there's no price. There's no fraud there because whatever it is, if there would be fraud, nobody would be living in Ramot. Everybody's deal would be off. The prices are gone through the roof. There'd be every deal would be considered fraudulent. So there is no fraud comes to that. Rish Lakish Amar, there is fraud if you sell the same house to 20 different people. That's fraud, right? But there's no fraud on the price. Right? Rish Lakish, so what does Rish Lakish do that about the karka? He says, karka. If it were just telling me that there's no fraud when it comes to karka, if you buy something from his hand, meaning it's a metalton, then al tonu, right? Al tonu. Then there's no fraud. Then there's fraud. Don't commit fraud. But if it's not something that's done by hand, then there is no fraud. Okana lamli. Why did it to say the word okana, right? Me next to miyad. It says okana miyad misecha. Could have just said chisimkra miyad misecha al tonu. Why does it again say okana next to the word miyad okana miyad misecha lamli shma minal? She could tell me that it has to be that the only way to acquire something that's movable is by a hand. There is no money doesn't work. Rabbi Yochanan says money does work. It's just exeter d'Rabbanan that you have to use Mashiach. Rabbi Yochanan, okana ma'avadlei. What does he do with okana? We boy like at a time the memker al tonu ein yeshem san lokech. That's only if the purchaser was cheated. The son of mocher minayin. Sometimes the mocher can be cheated. The mocher did not realize that his car was worth 100,000 shekels and he sold it for 50,000 shekels. So there's fraud there against him too. That's what you use okana. Okana, the extra okana teaches me that there's fraud on the mocher side too. You can't just say the purchaser got cheated, the deal's off. No, the seller could also be cheated. Okana al tonu, teaching me both things. whether it's the purchaser or the seller, either one of them can have been cheated, and the deal would be off. Rish Lakish tarti gomer minute. Rish Lakish learns both things. Number one, Rashi points out tarti gomer late. Onos mocher may okana altonu, and Mashiach from the fact that it says midasamach miyad l'lashon kinis. It says okana miyad. The fact that okana is next to miyad tells me that that's the only way to acquire movables is with Mashiach. And the okana and altonu, the double lashon there, is to teach me whether the lokeach or the mocher gets cheated, it's still considered cheating and fraudulent. Tanan. So we have machlokas here whether according to Reb Shimon, according to Rish Lakish, rather, the money doesn't work at all when it comes to metaltalin. Minatorah, it's got to be Mashiach, as it says, Okana miyad. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, Minatorah, money does work. It's just Xer Drabanan that money doesn't work. You need Mashiach. Tanan, our Mishnah says, we're at the first of the white lines of the Gemara. Rav Shimon Omer, Kol Shekasa Biyado, Yada Yada. The end of the Mishnah said, Rav Shimon says, no, they can't go back on the deal. Only the seller can go back on the deal. He's got the money in his hand. Obviously, if the purchaser still has the money in his hand and he hasn't made Mashiach, there's no transaction yet. But if there was a transaction in the sense that the seller received the money, he can go back on the deal, but not the buyer. Only the seller can go back. The Lokech cannot go back on the deal. Now, we're asking a kasha now on Rish Lakish. If you say Minatorah, money does acquire you the item Minatorah, like Rabbi Yochanan says, that's right. The seller can go back on the deal because he has the money, he can give the money back. Lokech, once he's given the money, it's a final deal. He can't go back on it. We can understand that at least. You can understand you gave the mocher the option to go back on the deal. If the Lokech has made bishop, if Lokech go back, why can't Lokech go back? Because he's paid for it already. Minatorah, Mos Konos, like Rabbi Yochanan. Eliyamet Mos Enes Konos. If you say money doesn't help at all, you need Mashiach. Lokech Namilah. Why can't if Lokech paid for it, according to Reb Shimon, why can't the Lokech go back on the deal? There's been no acquisition, there's been no kinyan yet, because money does not work at all, according to Rish Lakish. Minatorah doesn't work at all. So why can't Lokech go back on the deal too, according to Reb Shimon? I'll leave it Reb Shimon. Look at me, you're right. I'm not going according to Reb Shimon. I'm only explaining Kikamino, leave it Rabbanan. I'm explaining the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan who say that both of them can go back, the mocher or the Lokech can go back if the item has been paid for, but there's been no kinyan yet, no Mashiach. I say that that's only according to Rabbanan. I can't go according to Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon clearly says that that Mos does work Minatorah. That's why if you paid for it, you can't go back. You're the purchaser, you can't go back on it. I'm certainly not going to Reb Shimon. Shimon says that it's that Mos Konos, but the Rabbanan say according to Rish Lakish, the Rabbanan say that money doesn't work Minatorah. Oh, now, so if that's the case, I'm not explaining Reb Shimon. So Bishlam Rish Lakish, Hainu Dika Ben Reb Shimon Rabbanan. That's Reb Shimon Rabbanan. What's the difference? The Rabbanan say that Minatorah only Mashiach works, and therefore they can both go. They can both go back on the deal if he's paid, if the purchaser is paid, but he hasn't yet pulled the item to himself. He hasn't yet paid Mashiach. So that makes sense, right? That's what the Rabbanan say. Reb Shimon says no. Minatorah, the money does work. Minatorah, the money does work. That's why Lokech can't go back and deal. So according to Rish Lakish, I understand the machlokes between the Rabbanan and Reb Shimon. Rabbanan say only Mashiach works Minatorah, right? Only Mashiach works, and therefore they can both go back on the deal if he paid for it, if it didn't make Mashiach. And Reb Shimon says no, money does work, and that's why Lokech can't go back on the deal. Rabbi Yochanan, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, Ma'ike ben Reb Shimon Rabbanan, what's the machlokes between Reb Shimon and Rabbanan? They both say, according to Rabbi Yochanan, they both say that Minatorah works. It's Shem Nisr from Aliyah. So why does Reb Shimon say only the Moch can go back on the deal, not Lokech? The difference of Rav Chisda, just like they made a takana of Mashiach for the seller, in other words, both of them go back on the deal. Just like they made a takana of Mashiach on the seller, they made a takana on the Lokech also. Even though Lokech is a kal v'chomer, he can go back on the deal because if this item burnt down, he wants to go back on the deal. Rashi quotes the case on Testament days where a man bought some wine, and then he found out that the government took away the wine. So he says, I'm going back on the deal. I didn't make Mashiach yet. So there for sure he has an interest in it. Reb Shimon, less Rav Chisda. Reb Shimon doesn't know Rav Chisda. He doesn't hold the Rav Chisda that either one can go back on the deal. Only the seller can go back on the deal. Rabban Islu Rav Chisda, even though the logic would say Lokech should be more, but maybe the Moch can also go back on the deal. And he has some interest in it. If the price went up, he might want to sell it for more money. So if he just accepted money, there was no kinyan yet. That's why he says that. That's why, according to Reb Shimon, the seller can go back on the deal, but not the buyer. Okay, that's the machlokas. Tanan. Now another kasha. Our Mishnah says what? Avo Omer Mishapar. What do the Mishnah say that you cannot make money does not acquire it? Money does not acquire the item. It's got to be a kinyan. That's all it's going to matter. You can go back. Avalama, they said, God who paid back the Anshe Dor Mabel and Dora Floga will also pay back a person who doesn't stand by his word. A word is a word. So Avalama, that's what Mishnah said. Avalama Misha Par Midor Mabel, who else will be part of Misha and the person who doesn't stand by his word. In other words, even though paying for a movable with cash does not acquire it for you unless you made a kinyan, still, if you paid for it, you go back on your word, you try to get out of the deal, you're going to get a Misha Par, you're going to get this curse. Yeah, if you say money does work, that's why you get a curse, because Minatorah money works. The rabbi said you should make Mashicha. But still, if you paid for it, and technically it's a kinyan, and you go back on it, you're going to get a curse. Eliyamrit, Mos, and Konos, if money does not acquire it at all, why would you get a curse? Money doesn't do anything. If you say, like Rabbi Yochanan, right? If you say Mos, Konos, if you say Mos, that money doesn't work like Rish Lakish, rather, Rabbi Yochanan says money works in the Torah. That's why, even though the rabbi said you need Mashicha, but if you go back on your word after paying for it, you are going to get a curse. But if you say money doesn't work, you didn't do anything yet. It's like you didn't pay for it. You didn't do anything yet. Why should you get a curse if you go back on the deal? Mishum Dvarim for the words. If we Dvarim Mikoi Bavel, just because of words, just because you said something, you're going to get such a curse. For Tanya, we learned Rav Shimon Omer, when it comes to a transaction, and we said when it comes to Chalipin, right, that even though a talis, a garment, if I pull the garment, that can acquire money, right? Because I can do the Chalipin that way. But ain't dinars of this. When it comes to getting a garment and I give you a coin, remember what do we say? That most money, a coin does not affect Chalipin. Ain't most, ain't kesef, a Chalipin. Why? Because then your mind is on the coinage, on the value, not on the coin itself, not on the metal. Okay, even though it's mikom magom kachalocha, you're right. That's the halacha. The halacha is it doesn't work. Avalamru. But if you said, let's say you did give a coin, and you meant to make a kinyan. Avalamru misha par me'anshe dorma, the one God who paid back the anshe dorma, me'anshe dor flaga, me'anshe stom v'amoro, u'mitzvim beyond them. Forshim say that all these now he includes the mitzvah. People didn't stand by the word. Yeah, we're going to let you out. We're going to let you out. People who didn't keep their word. All these people didn't keep their word. Who also the part he will pay back. God will pay back misha and b'diburo. Okay, God was going to pay back those people. And as you try to make a kinyan and it didn't work, that's the halacha. The kinyan doesn't work, but still, if you meant to make a deal and you did some action and now you go back on it, God's going to pay you back. But if you just tried to make a deal, right? If you just negotiated just with words and you didn't do any action at all, lo kana. And if you go back on your word, even though you just shook hands, let's say, the rabbis aren't happy with you. Rashi says, they're not happy with a person like that because you're not the proper person in the eyes of the chachamim. But you're not going to get a curse just for going back on your word. If a person just goes back on his word, there was no action yet. He didn't give any money. He didn't make mashiach, nothing like that. He just said, "I'm going to buy it," and he says, "Yes, I agree. We agreed on a price." And now he goes back on it. He doesn't get a curse. He just says, right? So how do you explain that just because of the words you're going to get a curse according to Rish Lakish? The answer is Dvarim v'ikibadayu mos koi bavo. Here's the word. If you agree to something and you also paid for it, then you're going to get a curse. Dvarim v'lekibadayu mos lo koi bavo. But if you just said words and you didn't pay for it, then there's no curse. Either way, it's not a kinyan d'oraisa, but if you paid for it and you agreed, and now you go back on your word, you're going to get cursed. If you just said you agreed and there was no real transaction, then you didn't get it in writing, you didn't get it. Right? There's no kinyan. All right, we'll pick it tomorrow, Mr. Hashem, on the 12th line, Amarav. Yeah.
And then the seller changes his mind.
That's right. That's right. Raises the price. So it's again. So he's not going to get a curse because he didn't pay for it yet. You didn't pay for it. If you gave a down payment, you on a napkin, you gave a check or something like that, like they call that whatever they call that. You made a down payment. That's a transaction already. Now legally, if there's no contract, the lawyers will tell you that it's not a deal, but you'll get a curse done already because you gave them a check, right? What's the check worth?
It stretches.